This happened a while back during a road trip with my dad through North Carolina. My dad's a long-haul trucker, and I'd tagged along for a few days just to get some experience on the road. We pulled into a highway rest area for the night around 1 a.m. The parking lot was packed with big rigs, but the place was dead silent because most of the drivers were already asleep, prepping for early morning deliveries. And as we parked, my dad went straight to sleep. I'm a total night owl, so I stayed awake. By 2 a.m., I decided to head inside to use the restroom. I figured the place would be completely empty at that hour, so I brought my razor along to line up my mustache, something I usually only do at home where I can take my time. When you walk into this particular rest area restroom, it splits into two separate sides, left and right. I went to the left side. As soon as I walked in, I noticed a guy standing near the urinals. He was massive, at least 6'4". I didn't think much of it at first and just walked past him into one of the stalls. A few minutes later, I finished up, walked out to the sinks, and started washing my hands. That's when I noticed the guy hadn't moved an inch. He was still standing there in the exact same spot. The second he realized I was about to leave, he abruptly unzipped his pants and pretended to start using the urinal. The whole vibe was incredibly off, and it made me super uncomfortable. Wanting to get away from him and make it look like I was leaving, I walked out of that section and moved over to the right side of the restroom. It was totally empty. I stood in front of the mirror and started using my razor to line up my facial hair. Not even 10 seconds later, the same exact guy walked into the right side. Right then, alarm bells started ringing in my head. He had no logical reason to follow me into a completely empty, separate section of the restroom. He started walking directly toward me. Through the reflection of the mirror, I watched him get closer. The moment I lifted the razor up to my face, he suddenly froze right behind me. He looked genuinely shocked, almost as if seeing the blade in my hand completely ruined whatever he was planning to do. My heart was pounding in my chest. I kept my eyes locked on him through the mirror, trying my absolute best to act natural and keep my hands steady. He backed off slightly, stepped up to a urinal behind me, and pretended to unzip his pants again. When I glanced back at the mirror, he was staring dead into my eyes. He gave me a slow, creepy nod. I just nodded back, trying to hide my fear so he wouldn't realize I knew he was up to something. A few seconds later, he walked into an empty stall. When I looked through the gap in the stall door, he was standing completely still in the corner, staring wide-eyed straight at me. I pretended not to notice. Shortly after, he stepped back out and went right back to the urinal, pulling the same fake routine. The second I finished with my mustache, I didn't waste another moment. I grabbed my things to head for the exit. As I passed him, I gripped the razor tightly between my fingers, ready to use it as a weapon if he tried to jump me. I'm 5'9" and no slouch, but this guy was way bigger, older, and could have easily overpowered me. Thankfully, he didn't make a move. The moment I burst through the restroom doors, I saw security cameras right above the entrance, which brought a massive wave of relief. Thank God he didn't follow me out. I booked it back to the truck. My dad was still fast asleep. I immediately called a friend and told him everything that just went down. He told me to go back and check the restroom while on FaceTime with him. I gathered up the courage and walked back inside, but by then, the creepy guy was completely gone. As I was walking back to the truck for the second time, I noticed the separate parking lot in the back meant for passenger cars. There was a single red sedan parked there with its headlights blasting. The very second I turned my head to look at it, the headlights cut out completely. It was pitch black, so I couldn't see who was inside, but the timing was terrifying. I climbed back into the cab of the truck and locked the doors. I never told my dad about what happened. He's incredibly strict, and he had only recently started letting me go out on my own. I knew if I told him, he'd ground me from going anywhere alone until I turned 18. The guy didn't look homeless or like he was on drugs. His clothes were clean and his beard was well groomed, which honestly makes it scarier. To this day, my blood runs cold whenever I think about that night. I'm left with one terrifying question that will haunt me forever. If I hadn't brought that razor into the restroom with me, what would that guy have done? Needless to say, I'm way more careful about my surroundings now, and I never go out alone late at night. This happened a few years ago when I was 19. I live in a relatively large, quiet city in southern Europe. My neighborhood consists of small houses and residential buildings, nothing out of the ordinary, no sketchy areas or abandoned properties. I personally knew all of my neighbors, so I had always felt completely safe living there. One Friday, my parents drove out of town to visit some relatives for the weekend. This meant one thing: I had the entire house to myself. That same evening, my university was hosting its annual geography quiz. The night went smoothly. Our team took second place, and after celebrating, I hurried to catch the last subway home. It was early October, so the air was getting pretty chilly. I was exhausted, just walking down the quiet, dimly lit street toward my house, looking forward to eating some ramen and hitting the sack. Then, out of nowhere, the silence was shattered by one of the loudest, most blood-curdling screams I have ever heard in my entire life. It was a man's voice, and it sounded like he was in excruciating pain, like someone was literally cutting his arm off. I froze instantly, desperately scanning the darkness. The entire street was dead silent. Most of the houses had already turned their lights off for the night. I was genuinely freaked out because the whole situation was so unexpected. Suddenly, a second scream ripped through the air. This time, I got a better sense of the direction. It was coming from right near my house. Panicking, I picked up my pace. I wasn't running yet, but I was walking as fast as I possibly could, constantly looking over my shoulder and listening for any movement around me. Just as I rounded the corner near my house, I spotted a group of 4 or 5 people in the distance. They were probably about 200 yards away. The exact second they caught sight of me, they all started sprinting dead at me. I was completely stunned. Why on earth would a group of people just start charging at a random person on the street? My survival instincts kicked in instantly, screaming at me to run. Luckily, my house was right between my position and theirs, and much closer to me than to them. They were running full speed now, shouting completely unintelligible things. I bolted to my front door. My hands were shaking so badly that, just like in a horror movie, I dropped my keys on the ground. I scrambled to scoop them up, but before turning the lock, I forced myself to take one final glance behind me. They all looked disheveled and dirty, wearing ripped clothes, looking like transient ghosts chasing me down. Seeing how close they were, I knew I had made the right call to run. I finally unlocked the door, threw myself inside, and locked it behind me as fast as I could. I stood there in the pitch black, breathing heavily, my mind racing with terrifying thoughts. I was convinced they were going to break the door down any second, and I was entirely alone. I kept my ear pressed against the door for what felt like an eternity, but outside, everything had gone completely silent. After a few minutes, I slowly crept over to the window and peeked through the blinds. No one. I moved to the kitchen window. Still nothing. Just an empty street with the wind blowing through the trees. Even so, I decided to dial 112 to report the incident. I explained everything to the dispatcher, including the agonizing screams. She wasn't very helpful at first, repeatedly asking if I knew the people chasing me, and since I hadn't been harmed, she said there wasn't much they could do. Ultimately, she promised to send a patrol car to scout the area. About 20 minutes later, I saw a police cruiser slowly rolling down the street past my house. Feeling a small wave of relief, I finally went upstairs to get some sleep. I was completely drained. The next day, my parents and my best friend called to check in, but I kept the story brief and light so I wouldn't panic anyone. The day passed uneventfully, but the paranoia was still lingering. Before bed, I double-checked every single lock on the doors and windows. I turned on a movie to take my mind off things and finally started to relax. About an hour into the movie, I heard a loud, sudden bang from outside. It sounded exactly like someone had hurled a massive rock right at the side of the house. I grabbed the remote and killed the TV audio instantly. Complete, heavy silence followed. I didn't know what kind of sick games were being played, but my fear was quickly turning into pure frustration and anger. I crept to my second-floor bedroom window that faced the street and looked out. Everything seemed completely normal. I forced myself to stay awake and alert, finally dozing off around 4 a.m. The next day at noon, I woke up to the sound of my family coming home. I pulled them aside and told them everything that had happened over the last 3 days. As expected, they were incredibly shaken up and worried, but deeply relieved that I was safe. A week later, we installed security cameras all around the house, and nothing like that ever happened again. I never did get an update from the police. To this day, I still have no idea what caused those people to chase me. Who was that screaming man, and why was he in such distress? Was he an actual victim, or was the whole thing a twisted trap designed to lure unsuspecting targets closer so they could be robbed? Or worse? And was that loud bang on the second night connected, or was my mind just playing tricks on me? I've asked myself these questions a million times, but I guess I'll never know the truth.